so curious about the backstory of this movie. How did Electric Jesus come to be?
Well, I think it's that old adage that you hear in writing classes about write what you know. I know evangelical youth group culture, at least the 80s version of it. And I know 80s Christian rock music. And as a filmmaker, I always wanted to make a coming of age rock band movie. And no one's ever made one like this one that I could discover. So I kind of blended that thing of what I knew, that world, with some of the tropes, the expectations of a rock band movie, and that's where it kind of came from. But I think there's also this thing, like, I don't know that anybody else, I was trying to think what's something that nobody else in the world could make, and like only I could. And I think this kind of Napoleon Dynamite meets Almost Famous meets Stryper, I think that probably could only have come out of my twisted imagination.
Well, it's fantastic. And Brian, I love your character. The toupee scene just kills me. So were you familiar with this world of Christian music before you signed on for the movie?
I think for me, it was more my mom listening to Amy Grant. I think was more that was more what I was familiar with. I would say I'm familiar with the culture. I went to a Christian preparatory school growing up, but more than that, I'm from the South, and so I think that the familiarity with that much more. I was sort of generally aware of hard metal Christian music, but no, that was not in my wheelhouse. But I think the culture of the time, it is around the time that I grew up in the South, and yeah, was very aware of sort of the Christian music scene, if not the metal scene.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm coming to you from Chattanooga, Tennessee. So you my people.
There you go. Yeah, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and had relatives all throughout the South, was born and raised there. So I think particularly the place that Christian culture played in the South, certainly still some today, but I think at that time, the youth groups and this sort of strange dichotomy between being a high school student and being in the evangelical world, that was something I was familiar with. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. What was it like going back, doing research for this movie and listening to some of these bands for the first time, like listening to Stryper, listening to Petra?
For me, yeah. And I tell you, right after Chris and I talked for the first time, he sent me, I think it was Commandos for Christ, actually. I think that was kind of the first song that they had done. And I remember listening and going like, what is, because I hadn't heard, but like, what is this? But I think the humor, the slight tongue in cheek that is, let's all go commando. Let's be real. There's a double a meaning there, at least in my mind. So yeah, it was really intriguing. But I tell you what, I was, because in my conversation with Chris, he talked about Danielson Band. I was not familiar with him or them, but I was taken with just how well done it was already, like how well put together the music was. And then he started sending me more and more of that. So I was super impressed with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're seeing a huge resurgence of interest in Christian music and its origins, which is so interesting because it's a relatively new genre. So what do you think is driving this interest?
Well, I think that kind of evangelical Christian culture that grew out of, the Jesus movement, the hippies, it comes out of an early 70s revival movement in Southern California that spread across the country, and it became more codified and marketed as Christian music more in the 80s when I was coming of age in the 90s. But I think that's kind of fracturing
Yeah.
now. I think the books and the music and the movies and the TV shows and the styles that Christians sold, I don't know that they were so much built to last. I think people are trying to figure out what that is now. And so a lot of that old content seems kind of dated and strange, but a lot of us remember it. Some fondly, maybe some sheepishly. Certainly there's some cringing there, but that doesn't mean we don't have some nostalgia for it. So I think that many of us are just kind of puzzling over it now and trying to figure out what's worth keeping and maybe what might be best left in the past. So it's a topic of conversation and fascination for many people, for sure.
And this movie doesn't really provide a solution. I mean, you
Right.
talk, which I kind of love. You leave that question there, like, what is the answer? I don't know. Does there need to be one?
I think dramatically we resolve a conflict in the movie, but I think, yeah, as far as the film's take on the Christian music subculture, I think it's loving in a lot of ways. I think I think the movie's definitely, a lot of people said it's a love letter to Stryper, and I definitely see that in it for sure. But yeah, we kind of give you space to have your opinion about it. Like, if that's something that, there's some people that really found themselves wounded in their relationship to church growing up in the South, but other places too, and they don't have warm, fuzzy memories about that. So I think Electric Jesus gives everybody a space to maybe come back to that, remember it, and then sort through it a little bit. At least I hope so.
Well,
Yeah.
and let me say on that point, I think that, and I don't want to sound self-important about this movie or anything else, but I think truly that great art is about questions. It's not about answers. And I think that's where not just Christian culture, but everything runs into problems. This is the answer.
Yeah.
This is what is true. This is what you should think. This is how you should be. And I think for a lot of people, that's a turnoff. And I think to present this story, to me, a beautiful story, and about someone who is conflicted, and let you draw your own conclusions and apply your own experiences to it, makes you question. And I think ultimately the question is way more important than the answer.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, Skip he has no business managing anything. His character is so funny, but he's so passionate about this band, and you just love him. Brian, what drew you to this particular role? Because this is such an interesting character.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost for me personally, there's two things. One is that it was based in at least a time and a place, and to some degree a culture that I was familiar with, but had never been able to explore before as an actor, which made it really appealing to me. I mean, I am consistently looking for things that are different and allow me to play different types of character. And Chris gave me an opportunity in this film to do something, that I hadn't really done before, aside from theater, which maybe 47 people in the world saw. So, that for me was the main thing. And I think that, the second major thing for me is, I love, so many people now associate me with the character that I played on The Office. But I think ultimately, as an actor, the thing that I did much more before The Office, and what I really, really enjoy, is the opportunity to play a flawed character that on the surface may be viewed as a bad guy, and to attempt to work and find the humanity within that character that gives the complexity and explores the idea of that it's, again, not black and white, that he may be flawed, but I think ultimately well-intentioned, at least in part well-intentioned. And so to attempt to play him and discover what is good about him. I think ultimately he's someone who, like many of us, quite frankly, that has bigger dreams for himself than maybe is beyond his potential. But it doesn't necessarily make him a bad guy. He's a flawed guy who's trying to do his best, and that's at least the way that I wanted to approach it.
Yeah, I think every character is that way, though. I think they're all flawed, but they're all empathetic, which has all the makings of a good movie, because these aren't perfect people. And I think sometimes, especially in faith movies, that's sort of the tendency.
Yes, no, I agree. And I guess I don't know why I'm talking. I'm about to steal Chris's line that I've heard him say so many times, but I really do think it's true. I think it goes back to what I was talking about not delivering answers, but leaving open the questions. And, Chris talked a lot about, on set and since that, faith-based movies, or I'm sorry, not faith-based movies, any movie essentially portrays the Christians as either evil and bad or totally 100% good. And I think the truth is, you only need to look at the news any day of the year to find out that people are people. And this movie really looks at, I think, the idea of Christianity, and no one is intrinsically evil or intrinsically good, or a Superman, I think is what Chris describes him.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Now, this movie is so funny. I was laughing out loud multiple times. How did you walk this balance between being so funny and also respectful to the faith community?
I love the characters.
Yeah.
I love all of them, even when they're bad or dumb or wrong. Brian can tell you, we talked a lot. We're not making a faith-based movie. So loving the characters, but also not trying to satisfy that genre, which is a fine genre. I know lots of people like movies like that, but Electric Jesus isn't designed to trick you into becoming a Christian or to affirm everything you want to be true. It's not a movie that's going to fix your marriage or teach you how to be a better person. I think it's just I think lovingly crafted, honest comedy about growing up with Jesus, And so in that, I do have memories of that in my Southern Baptist youth group in Columbia, South Carolina. And so many of those people I'm still friends with now. And I love us. And we were goofy and weird. And we, we weren't always right. But I think if a filmmaker, a Christian filmmaker or otherwise, if the goal is to make this piece of art, make it honest, if you just tell the truth, I think the audience, whether they're Christians or not Christians, will feel respected. And that's why I think we like things, because we feel like the people telling us the story, they like us and they're telling a story. They respect me as an audience. And that's what I'd like to see more of maybe in Christian films.
So this movie's been out for a little while now, and I love to see how much traction it's getting and so many great responses. But what are some of the responses you guys have heard about the movie? Especially, I'm so interested to hear from the people who are from this generation.
Yeah. Well, the Stryper guys all loved the movie, which was very, very rewarding. We went up and showed them the movie when it first came out, and I was so nervous, but they loved it. That was good. I think we've gotten so much support from former and current artists in that CCM world that see their own journey in the film, and that surprised me. I'm a fan. I'm not a musician. I just made up the story. I don't. But also, fans of the old music feel seen, I think, or people that grew up in that youth group culture. It's like, yeah, that's exactly the way we talked. We talked like that. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people like that. But also surprisingly, we've found that, we have a lot of fans of the film that are not Christians or would call themselves ex-evangelicals. And they just see it as a fun rock and roll comedy. I mean, I've had people that have texted me and said, basically cursed my name and said, I can't stop singing Commando for Christ. Thanks a lot. My children are running through the house singing Commando for Christ. Thank you, Chris, so much. And they're pretty upset about that. So yeah, it's been a lot of really fascinating response, which is very rewarding whenever you step into something kind of weird and then it comes across and people, see something about it that really resonates with them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a very creative story. I haven't seen anything like this on the big screen. This is a first.
Thank you for saying that. I'm glad to hear that.
And you have star power. I mean, you have Brian, who of course we all know and love from The Office. And you have Judd Nelson, who is just an 80s icon.
Yeah.
So what did it mean to you to get these huge names in this movie? Because this is a big deal.
Well, I mean, Brian's spoken to, the siren call of something different, that I think that does help for an actor. A paycheck helps too, but like Brian has so much range as an actor that things that he does that most people don't get to see on The Office, although his work on The Office is amazing. But I just kind of, me and my wife, Emily, that produced the movie with me, we bet on his talent. And he does not disappoint. He demonstrates a kind of range that you don't always see, certainly not in a comedy from a comedy actor, and certainly not an actor who's known for such an iconic role, really totally stepping out of that.
Yeah.
And he was enthusiastic about doing that too. Thank you for that, Brian. It was
no, that's very nice. Look, I think that, and Chris and I talked about it quite a bit early on too, that maybe we didn't, maybe this was just in my mind. I didn't, it's not, I don't think it's Skip Wick's movie. It's not, I never viewed it that way. It was really about coming in and attempting to fit into the ensemble. I mean, that was that was, for me, it was a different, a lot of these young actors had been working on this movie for a long time, and they had some starts and stops, and a lot of them had been cast for a while. And I think, for me, it was, let me do their thing, but let me attempt to integrate ourselves. I mean, we're all in that bus together, me and all of them, for a long time. And I think that for me was what was so essential, was for I just like in the movie, they're a high school group, and I step in, and so sort of mirroring that in the story, that was what I wanted to do as I showed up in Columbus, Georgia, for us to start filming, was begin to just step into the group and have that relationship mature. I think one of the things I think that, whether it was totally by luck, as what happens in films often, by the way, or not, the first scene that we filmed when I got into town was the scene where I meet them all for the first time in the, community space at the church, and try to convince them and their parents that, to allow me to take them on this journey. And I think that, again, it could have totally been scheduling luck, or Chris can claim genius on it. I think that really helps. So I don't know why I'm going into this, tell the story, but I went in to do an episode of Criminal Minds, and it's the weirdest structure for a television show in the history of television shows, which is every week, the bad guy who comes in is the star of the episode. Okay, that's the structure. They got the police looking after him, but it's really an hour where the star of the episode is this guy who comes in. And I remember we went in, right? So I don't know anyone, I don't know anything. And the first thing we shoot is an overnight shoot at the very end of the episode, where I get caught for everything that I delivered like a 3-page, no joke, speech about me and what's happening. And I kept thinking all night long, we haven't shot anything yet. I haven't done anything. I just got cast last week and I don't even really know who this character is. And we're starting with this. So again, I think that the process of working on the movie was well thought out and sort of helped bring us with life imitating art in that way. And you know, I loved working with all of those guys, and we had a great time and continue to.
You know, Leah, if you can imagine it, these kids, we call them kids, they're young adults, but the young actors that make up the ensemble, the 6 of them, they are prime, you know, they're the audience that maybe more than any of us have embraced The Office, like, and have watched it multiple times. So for them, you know, that moment of Brian coming into that group is also that moment of, you know, a star of their favorite show that they, you know, they've put themselves to sleep, you know, watching for years. And one of the things that's so great about Brian is he's so disarming and just kind of fun that all, any like weirdness or starstruckness went away, you know, almost immediately. And that's his job to do that. It's not on them. You know, they're normal people that are going to be a little wowed when he walks in the room, but he was really great at putting people at ease and then becoming part of that ensemble, as he's saying. So
yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, every time I make chili, I think of Kevin.
Yeah, it's hard not to.
Now, I want to hear from both of you on this one. What do you ultimately want audiences to take away? What do you want them to be talking about after they see Electric Jesus?
I think for me, and this would be the discovery I made making the movie, you know, writing, shooting, editing, the idea that the story you're living now, we all understand we're living a story. It's not all about you. It's not all about me. Often, maybe most often, we are supporting characters in another person's story. Like Eric realizes about his friend Sarah so many years later. This is a bit of a spoiler, but I mean, he finally figures out after a long period that maybe the story I've been telling all these years was really about her. And so maybe a takeaway for a viewer would just be, you know, it's not all about me, it's about us. In life, in our faith, in our politics, in our pursuits, in our families, I think that can be an amazing and positive, hopeful takeaway. There was a story that Brian told on his podcast about Steve Carell, about the time that Carell gave up his seat on a pass van. Brian, do you remember that story?
Yeah,
it kind of goes to this idea.
No, it does. When Steve Carell left The Office, we had a party, not because he was leaving, but like a celebration of him. And, you know, one of the things that he taught me, and I've had the opportunity to work with a few people in this way, but nobody better than Steve, that it was never about him. It was always about him performing his role in whatever was happening in a scene or on a shoot that was to the betterment of other people. And people started telling stories about him, and he joked later about it was like his funeral. But Debbie Pierce, who was a hairstylist on the show, she had a bad hip, and you know, on a movie set, there's a van that takes you to locations at times, and the star sits in the front seat, or you know, whatever else. And she was struggling to get into the van, and Steve said, "Well, Debbie, take the front seat. You take the front seat," and helped her get in. And then when they got to the set and the location, nobody knew this story. She was telling the story. He went and got her big bags of hair stuff and products, and carried it with her chair to over toward the set. And she said, not only did he do that day when he saw me struggling, but every time we went anywhere, he did that. he would go to the van that I was in and help me get in and carry my stuff. And, you know, for me, that lesson from him is how I try to behave on every set that I'm on. But I think how it applies to the movie is, yeah, it's that lesson that it's not necessarily about you, even if you think it's about you. It's about a community. It's about it's about other people, and I think that's a really beautiful thing about the movie.